This is the brief on the core definition of inflation. Look, we constantly hear about rising prices, right? But understanding the strict economic rules behind these shifts is literally the only way to know what's actually happening in our economy. So to figure out where things are heading, we first have to understand what actually qualifies as inflation, and, well, what doesn't. First, inflation isn't just things getting more expensive. It's a continuous, sustained process. An official inflationary cycle only begins in an economy when this continuous climb passes the 3% mark per year. Now you might be wondering, so what if the government suddenly hikes up taxes and your groceries jump in price overnight? Is that inflation? Absolutely not. A sudden, one-time price increase is completely different. True inflation has to be a chronic, relentless upward climb. So if anything continuously climbing over 3% is officially an inflationary problem, what's the actual sweet spot central banks are aiming for? Second, the goal isn't absolute zero, which might actually surprise you. For many economies around the world, the explicit target is to keep these price increases neatly contained within a target range of 1% to 3% per year. Ultimately, true inflation is a continuous price climb above 3%, not a one-off tax bump, and economies globally are constantly pulling the levers to keep that growth safely boxed inside the 1% to 3% range.
This is the brief on the Consumer Price Index. We're breaking down exactly how we measure inflation, which is absolutely crucial because while everybody talks about rising costs, very few of us actually understand the math behind how it's tracked. First, the CPI measures inflation using a strictly monthly fixed basket of goods. Think of it kind of like checking out at the supermarket with the exact same grocery list month after month, just to see if your final receipt is getting more expensive. Second, to keep that grocery list from becoming totally obsolete, the basket adapts to our actual public habits. I mean, think about it. What if people stop buying physical DVDs and switch entirely to streaming? Well, the items inside aren't static forever. They're updated to reflect our real lifestyle, making sure the measurement actually matches reality. Finally, because that basket covers so many wildly different things, the index prioritizes points over currency. You can't exactly compare the price jump of a dozen eggs to a brand new car using raw dollars, right? So to standardize the whole shebang, the absolute most important metric becomes the rate of change. This is presented in standardized points rather than dollars or shekels. It essentially tracks the speed at which prices are shifting, not the actual price tag of the basket itself. Ultimately, the CPI is just a living, evolving snapshot of our everyday shopping trips, translated into a simple point system. So the next time you hear inflation is up, you'll know exactly whose shopping basket they're looking at.
This is the brief on the core drivers of inflation. You know, rising prices aren't just random bad luck. They're driven by specific economic levers and recent global shocks that directly impact the cost of everyday life. So think of inflation kind of like a fever. It's a noticeable symptom, but what is the actual underlying infection causing it? Well, first we get this fever through excess demand. It's basically a massive bidding war. When we have too much appetite for a limited amount of goods, the prices naturally get bid up. But if it's not consumers driving up prices, it's the cost of creating the goods themselves. Which brings us to our second driver, input inflation. This is when raw materials get more expensive. Take the recent spike in oil prices caused by the war in Iran and the closure of the Strait of Hormuz this month, May 2026. How does a distant geopolitical bottleneck instantly make your local groceries more expensive? Well, expensive oil raises the cost of manufacturing and shipping everything. But even if demand is normal and materials are stable, there's a third trapdoor. Finally, we have currency devaluation. So wait, even if our local market is perfectly balanced, we can still get hit with inflation simply because our local money lost its muscle on the global stage, making anything we buy from abroad pricier? Absolutely. Ultimately, whether it's excess demand, expensive raw materials, or a weakened currency, these factors can act individually or team up to drive your prices higher. So the next time you see a price jump, you'll know exactly which of these three gears is turning.
This is the brief on the real victims of inflation. You know, inflation isn't just some abstract economic jargon you hear on the evening news. It's a literal financial drain that disproportionately targets very specific groups. And today, we're breaking down exactly who pays the price. First up, let's look at who feels this immediately: poor families. When pretty much every single dollar you make goes directly toward basic consumption, well, you feel that pain every single day at the supermarket. For these households, it's not just a metric. It functions as a brutal daily tax on basic survival. Second, we see this drain creeping right into the broader workforce, hitting salaried employees. You'd think a predictable income is safe, right? But inflation triggers what we call real wage erosion. Basically, even though your paycheck stays exactly the same on paper, its actual purchasing power just drops, meaning you can buy way fewer goods. I mean, what good is a steady paycheck if it suddenly buys half as much at the register? Finally, let's zoom out to the commercial sector, specifically businesses that took out loans. Because of the resulting interest payments on those loans, these companies are getting severely hurt as those soaring costs completely wipe out all their profits. It's a wildly frustrating reality because these businesses are essentially working full-time just to pay the bank, rather than to actually grow or succeed. Ultimately, inflation acts as a silent thief that targets everyday shoppers, shrinks steady paychecks, and swallows the profits of borrowing businesses.
This is the brief on central banks and interest rates. This quick breakdown of how the economy is managed is absolutely crucial because it explains exactly why borrowing money suddenly gets more expensive. Ever wonder who actually decides if your loan is about to get more expensive? First, central banks, specifically the Federal Reserve in the US and the European Central Bank in Europe, have one primary job: to stabilize prices in the economy. Think of them kind of like a referee whose sole job is stepping onto the field to blow the whistle when prices start running out of control. Second, now that we know who the referee is, what exactly is their whistle? Well, when prices rise, the central bank uses restrictive monetary policy, which really just means they raise interest rates. Wait, so raising rates is basically their only real weapon against inflation? Yeah, it's wild, but that is their efficient, effective, and almost exclusive tool. Finally, since we know their tool is the interest rate, how do we know when they'll actually use it? All you have to do is look at the inflation data. Grasping this direct cause and effect relationship is literally like unlocking an economic cheat code for your finances. Ultimately, inflation data is the ultimate crystal ball, telling you exactly when central banks will be forced to hike up interest rates to stabilize the economy.
This is the brief on the economic chain reaction of inflation and interest rates. We hear about this stuff on the news literally all the time, right? But today we're breaking down the exact domino effect it actually has on your wallet, your job, and the whole economy. First, let's look at the immediate trigger. To fight off rising prices, central banks hike up those interest rates, making loans way more expensive for all of us. You know, it's kind of like hitting the brakes hard on a speeding car. It immediately adds friction, and suddenly, borrowing money goes from a basic given to a premium luxury. Second, this sudden friction creates a massive ripple effect. Because borrowing is just so incredibly expensive now, businesses pull back on their real investments, and everyday people end up draining their savings just to cover higher loan payments. This directly causes the whole economy to slow down, bringing higher unemployment and just a lot of uncertainty, which naturally leads to the big question. Wait, if jacking up rates threatens our jobs, shrinks our savings, and creates all this massive uncertainty, why on earth do we do it? Finally, the answer really lies in the long-term goal. We do it because, despite those super harsh short-term side effects, like economic slowdowns and job losses, crushing inflation is absolutely the healthiest scenario for households and businesses over the long run. Basically, high interest rates are a painful but totally necessary economic medicine used to cure inflation, causing a short-term slowdown to ensure long-term stability. Sometimes, you just have to swallow the bitter pill today to keep the economy healthy tomorrow.